Hello, in this video I'm aiming to just do a quick introduction on how to get started with Python. And by getting started I mean how do we get a Python prompt up so that you can start typing in commands and seeing some output. I'm not going to wait so much about what commands we then type in. There's kind of plenty of tutorials for how to learn Python already available on the internet. This is a more practical getting going guide. Because you probably don't have a suitable Python environment available to you already. Now, one of the key things about getting going with Python is that you often want more than one version at the same time. Because your computer probably already has Python available to it. It's probably been installed by one or more programs that you're using on a day-to-day basis. When we're doing development in Python, when we're making scripts, we don't want to use that version that's already on your computer. Because often we need to install specific versions of Python. Sometimes we need to make changes to the versions of different libraries that we're using. And we don't want to do that on the version that your computer is already using because it might break it. It might cause other things that you're relying on to stop working. What we do instead is we install a second, or indeed even more versions, a second copy of Python, and we do our development in that. In order to do that, we would typically use a distribution known as Anaconda. And this is really just a wrapper that lets us have multiple versions of Python going at the same time. So to install Anaconda, you can just do a search for Anaconda, and it's probably the top link that comes up at anaconda.com. And depending on which platform it is you're using, you'll see a download button there. Now it can take a few minutes for you to download that and then install it, and there'll be instructions for how do you install it on your particular system. So I'll assume that you've downloaded and installed that. The precise procedure will then vary a little bit, of course, depending on which operating system you're using. But in Windows, once you've downloaded and installed Anaconda, you'll get something called Anaconda Navigator in the start menu there, and you can click on it to start the program. Starting Anaconda will take a little bit of time depending on your computer, but when it has launched, you'll get an environment like this. And all of these different boxes that we have here are different tools for running your Python in. Now, there's a couple of points to highlight here. So, firstly, I would recommend doing your development in Spyder. That's what we use on a day-to-day basis. It says launch for me because I've already got it installed. Some of these other ones say install. If you've not got Spyder installed by default, you might need to just install it first. But when it is installed, you can press the launch button. Now, there's a number of other tools. So you'll probably hear a lot about Jupyter notebooks, and you can install and launch those from here. Some people like to do their development in PyCharm or in VS Code. They're all valid, but in my lab we've standardized on using Spyder, partly because it's a very MATLAB-like environment and people tend to get up to speed with it relatively quickly. It's also got a built-in variable explorer, which is quite good for the sort of development that we do, where we want to be able to look at what our variables are, plot them very quickly and easily. And certainly I find Jupyter notebooks aren't the best for doing that in. Now, the other thing to note about the Anaconda Navigator interface is this drop-down box here. So this is where we have our multiple versions of Python installed. So the default one is called base, and that's where things will be put by default. But if I wanted to, I could switch to a different environment, and that different environment may well have a different version of Python installed, a different version of different libraries. And it's very common that we need to have a dedicated environment for our code so that we have the right library versions for what we need to work on. So there's an environment tab here, and you can press create down at the bottom. If you want to make a new one, you give it a name. You can pick which version of Python it is you would like to have in there, and of course you then press create. Now you can use this interface as well to install packages. So if you're using say a particular version of matplotlib, you may well find that that's not installed by default. Actually, for installing packages, what I would suggest is using what's called the Anaconda prompt. So if we come back to the start menu, what will also have been installed is the Anaconda prompt to correspond to our Anaconda installation. And this is just a command line interface, not to Python, but to our installation of Python. So when we need to do maintenance on our installation, we use the Anaconda prompt. So you can see that I'm in the base environment, like I'm in Anaconda here. If I wanted to, I could switch environments. I could do conda activate, and maybe I'll switch to my project allocation. And we can see there that it has changed the environment that I'm in. And often you'll see when you've got to use libraries, you need to install them. And this is where you would put your pip command. So you could do pip install matplotlib, say. I think I've already got that installed on this environment, so it will say it's there. But often when you want to bring in some external library, you would install it at the Anaconda prompt here. So then once you're happy, you've got your environment installed, and it's very common you have to come back to it and install packages as you're doing your development. You can press the launch button in Spyder, and it will give you a interface window that looks like this. And then fundamentally, this is where you start doing your Python development. So the command window here is where you can enter your commands. So we could do print hello, and that's our hello world example. Over here is a text interface. So here we're going to store it as a file. I could save the file if I wanted to, and then we can run it. And this is the kind of IDE type environment. So normally we'd be typing our commands in here, saving them, and then pressing the run button, and the results will be displayed in the console here. And hopefully that's all you need to get up and going to fundamentally get Python installed on your computer. And then, as I say, there's plenty of other tutorials on the internet for how do you start developing your code for what to put into your Python file.